I didn't think the scene was a very supportive scene. I didn't. I actually think I thought the scene I grew up in tended to lean unsupportive, judgy, and misogynistic.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, I'm about 3 people away from gaining 4,000 followers on my Instagram account. So if you want to help push me over the edge, that'd be great. You just go to Instagram and look up This Was The Scene. That one's pretty much my most active social media account. So if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with the podcast and upcoming episodes and things like that, definitely go follow that account and help me get pushed over 4,000 followers. Fata Booking is a North America-based boutique booking agency and management firm. Founded in '96 by Eva Alexiou-Reo, Fata has worked with and exponentially grown the careers of credible artists such as Jimmy Eat World, Hot Water Music, Flogging Molly, Elliott, May, Rusted Root, MC Lars, The Blood Brothers, Pretty Girls Make Graves, and a ton more. Eva's name always came up a lot back in the day, and even through this podcast, her name has come up a bunch. So I want to get her perspective of what it was like to grow a booking agency, and with the help of Kim Heiner, I got Eva on the Skype, and this is what we chat about. The Wilkes-Barre scene, starting Fata Booking, advice from Kevin Lyman, should she write a book, how are bands making money, how has she gotten bands, Pretty Girls Make Graves, venues taking a cut of merch, and a ton more. Lastly, as I keep saying, I own an animation company called Drive 80 Studios. It's drive80.com if you need an explainer video, whiteboard animation, or logo animation. You can email me at mike@drive80.com to get samples and pricing. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, let's get started. So Kim Heiner, she connected us. So what happened was I did an interview with Ryan Cabrera, which is really outside of the whole focus of the podcast, but they had reached out, like he's doing some press or whatever, and I'm like, I kind of want to learn about the Simpsons, Ashley Simpson, all that shit. So I was like, and it's a really good interview. So Kim messages me because she's married to my really good friend Rob. She's like, I can't believe you interviewed Ryan Cabrera, and then she starts going through the list, and she's like, oh, I was really involved in this scene. Have you ever thought of this person? So I didn't know how involved she was, but you guys were friends back in the day.
Yeah.
How'd you guys meet?
I don't even remember how we met. Some of the time lapsing from like when I wasn't working in the music industry versus just being around and going to shows, it blurs who met when. So it's been so long. I don't remember exactly where our first encountering was. But I grew up in Wilkes-Barre, which is not terribly far, obviously, from where I went to school, which was New Brunswick. Sometimes it blurs like who was from that scene, because we did a ton of shows in Wilkes-Barre. Like the Wilkes-Barre scene was like bopping when I was young. We had like all the bands come in, and by the time I moved to New Brunswick, I knew so many bands, even though I went to school there. I was there with purpose. I think.
What was the club? We played a show with the Lawrence Arms in Wilkes-Barre in 2001, and it was this small little club. It was just basically like a place for selling merch and then a stage at the back.
I feel like I left in 97, so 96, 97. It was like a cafe. I feel like there was like a cafe there that did shows for a while, and I'm just spacing on the name. That place started while I still was in Wilkes-Barre, probably my last 2 years of high school, and hopefully the name will come to me before I finish the story. But it used to be in this really old / cool / very haunted feeling hotel right off the square in Wilkes-Barre, which I think the second location also was around that square, which is actually not a square, it's a circle. I don't know why they call it the square. It was this beautiful little cute cafe, and I had this like cute little couple that started it, and they did like singer-songwriter stuff, and they moved to this different location, and like basically the scene kids of Wilkes-Barre found it, got them to put a stage back there. And like early on, I even had bands like Elliott play there and Hot Water Music play there. I don't remember the name is spacing, but you're right. It was like a front little cafe. The second location was like a very little cafe, where the first location was like all windows and this beautiful bright cafe that had like clouds painted on the ceiling. This one felt very like dingy club wise, right? Like it
Yes.
felt like in like yeah, and like the big windows were like shadowed out with curtains so that way shows could happen there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I remember what you're talking about. I just the name is spacing me, but I didn't get to live that second era because I was already gone of that location. But the first location was super dope, and that hotel doesn't exist anymore. It was like this majestic old haunted hotel down in Wilkes-Barre.
I actually got married. I'm divorced now, but I got married in Wilkes-Barre. I always say Wilkes-Barre.
Really?
It was some farm, some barn that they rented it out for weddings. It was amazing.
It wasn't in Wilkes-Barre proper though.
It was about a 15, 20 minute ride outside of it.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm like, I don't know if we have any barns. Like Dallas area, was it near the lake? Like
Yes, it was
yeah,
Dallas.
okay. Yeah, yeah. Dallas is cool. All that area is really, really pretty up there. I mean, that's the thing about the Poconos and all the Pocono surrounding areas. There's so many pretty pockets. And Wilkes-Barre, when I grew up, was actually a really nice area. It was like super nice and clean and safe-ish. And we, as kids, like we would walk. I mean, I met up with some friends at a wedding at the Kirby Center in Wilkes-Barre in January, and they were all like the skater kids at the wedding. And they're like, do you remember we used to skateboard from your house in Kingston all the way to Wilkes-Barre? It's like, that's like a 7 mile, 10 mile duration. We used to skateboard the whole way there. I'm like, yeah, I do remember that. Do you remember we used to sneak out and go to shows and walk 4 miles? It was just much different area than it is and has been for a while now. Like when I was leaving, it was not. It was showing signs for the worst, and then it became the worst, unfortunately.
Well, that's a good segue to start out how I usually do is how did you get involved in the punk scene?
Well, that's a really good question. The high school I went to, which apparently doesn't exist anywhere outside of Wilkes-Barre, I feel like was 7th through 12th. It was Myers High School. I went into that school really not knowing anyone because we happened to be in a catchmere that I can go to either or high school. And my father and my mother and father were divorced, and he was insistent that I went to this high school, which happened to be like 2 miles from my house. And of course, my immigrant parents were like, you're walking. And I'm like, okay, great. When we were at that school, I didn't really know anyone. And I became friends with a group of, it was probably like only like 4 or 5 people. They had been going to the local shows down in Wilkes-Barre in the square area again, which is where a lot of the shows were, at this place called the Factory, which was really a dope club. So we're dating back 92.
Okay, this is when punk starts to become more mainstream.
No, yeah, not really, because Green Day got big when I was a junior. So 95 is when I saw the turn of punk becoming mainstream. And 91, 92, Blink-182 was just Blink. And they didn't even have the 182 after them yet. And they were on like co-headlining with like Sicko, which I love Sicko.
Oh, wow.
And
Good throwback.
And so like we're like talking about a lot of underground scene still, no bands. I mean, like we're really like that popular yet. Bands like Ashes and like Jawbreaker and Jawbox and a lot of that stuff was kind of circulating around by the time I was like 15, 16. Like I was getting into the Arches of Loafs of the world and missing them because they broke up before I got to see them. And like the Lifetimes, those are the artists that we were seeing. And there was like a huge hardcore scene in Wilkes-Barre too. I would say more hardcore than punk personally, but others might disagree with that, which is the ongoing joke between like what kind of band is Minor Threat? Are they a punk band or are they a hardcore band? And depending on which respected group you spoke to at the time, they were a punk band or a hardcore band. So like we had a lot of hardcore bands in Wilkes-Barre and like post-melodic artists towards like the latter part of the 90s. And like mid 90s to 94 and stuff like that's like the real like emo-y, promise ringy kind of sound ended up going into Wilkes-Barre too. But like early on, we just had like a lot of hardcore, and we're talking about hardcore like more of like leaning towards like a Dillinger Escape Plan sound,
like mathy kind of style. Or?
Yeah, like Turmoil was one of the local bands that became really big on the touring side. Snapcase came a lot to Wilkes-Barre. I mean, so did like the Earth Crisis, but people love that band. I did not. I think straight edge is weird, but that's okay. That's because I grew up with everyone straight edge, so I get to have my own opinion on this. But I mean, we had like a lot of like West Coast artists come, but primarily like, we had like the Dead Guys and the hardcore bands that I still would listen to coming through, like the VODs from Long Island and stuff like the Sick of It Alls. So there was a big scene on that in Wilkes-Barre, a big skateboard scene. Then the post melodic, which then turned into quote the real forefathers of emo that disowned that name as fast as they retained that name, came into that area. So I went to all those shows, and then at 16 I was helping organize and finding different spots down to strip clubs. We were throwing shows in strip clubs. Like we were finding anything we could throw a show in, anything you could think of. By the time I was about close to 18, I had known a lot of bands because I've done shows and I knew people at record labels. And so Hot Water Music approached me, who I became friends with, and they're like, why don't you help us book our tour? And because I apparently make really good choices, I said yes, which was that was very sarcastic at the time. I was like, what the hell am I doing?
Wait, before that though, like to get into doing all that stuff, did you grow up just seeing how things work a little bit easier than someone else would for putting on a show or the back end stuff?
Well, because I'm definitely a learn by falling on your face kind of individual. Whenever I did the shows, I didn't have anyone to like give me any kind of mentorship in that. But like my mother and my mother was always and is always has been a really good businesswoman. And I mean, I used to work within her jewelry stores and count money and account for things. So I think that I knew that everything had a check and balance.
There we go.
And I think that, like, still, my mom was telling someone when we were in Greece a few weeks ago that, like, oh, she's telling my son, like, when you stack your number, your money, you're supposed to have the faces facing the same way, and in order by lowest number to highest. And she's like, your mother does that still, because like that's what we used to do when we were little, counting money at the jewelry store.
Was it like singles, 20s, 10s, 5s in the world?
Yeah,
Yeah, I used to work at a gas station, so.
right. And then you take the last one, you fold it. So I didn't have mentorship leading into doing shows. And I definitely did not have a really good guidance when it came to being a booking agent. I had help from Jason Black and Hot Water Music based on him doing independent tours. Everyone back then was independent still. I think at the time when I started Fata, which if there's something you wanted to know before I get into that, tell me.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just leading into because it's like I always want to know how people got into the punk scene in general, and then everyone goes in this different direction. So either you went and became a producer, you went and became a band, and then you went to start booking. I mean, all these paths are just so crazy to me of just like what triggered someone to say, oh, this is where I feel more comfortable.
Right. Well, I think in the music industry, the funny thing about it is there's not a time and place where I think there's a sure feeling. You're kind of like when I started Fata, I had no idea what I was I didn't know it was a plan. I didn't know it was like a foreshadowing into 28 years of this career in the same position. I was just a kid that loved like Bikini Kill and Arches of Loaf and some like hardcore scene stuff, and hung out with skateboarders and played war card games in the parking lot with them. I did always love music. Like my parents we're off the boat Greek, and I love Greek and cultural music. But my stepfather went to Woodstock, so our house was like anytime he was home, there was a record being played, and it would be everyone from, Janis Joplin to the New York Dolls or the Ramones. I mean, I heard New York Dolls and the Ramones in my home growing up, not from friends. I heard countless artists, the Bowies and like the Kinks, even like some of the crasser punk artists, like was from my stepfather, and even things that, like the Clash, or like he was obsessed even with Joe Strummer stuff. So I was always around music in my household, and I had a good understanding of how music evolved and different landmarks, like down from the Django Reinhardts or the Benny Goodmans, like onward. And I think that made it really fun for me to get into what I did get into. And I think it started like more socially for me. Like I definitely saw myself having fun, hanging out with the kids I was hanging out with. And I hung out with skateboarders, like more. Like I didn't hang out with scene kids. And my skateboarder friends, like a lot of them listened to like underground hip hop, which I did too. Did graffiti, which I won't mention any names. And I mean, like, did, breakdancing and, had warehouse parties. So it just happened to be that was all filtered into the same scenes where some of them liked hardcore and punk music. A lot of time, I mean, my friend Aubrey at the time and I remember one of the first shows we just walked into was because we were in the parking lot bored at a show while the guys were outside skateboarding. And like at the time, like it was just a big friend group. It's not like anyone was a girlfriend of someone's, especially like the skater group I hung out with. They always wanted to date cheerleaders. But we just walked into a show and that's how how world kind of started.
So you kind of mentioned something when your stepdad's playing the music and stuff. Are you the kind of person that would want to learn more about the band and where it came out of, or did you just listen to the music? So you would want to like break it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm like the worst with my phone. Like even when I'm watching a movie or like I hear and Shazam something, I go down a rabbit hole of like digging back who the person is and who's singing, or like if it's an actor on like my husband hates watching anything with me. He's like, I'm like, oh, this guy's married. Oh, he has 3 kids. Oh, did you know that he was in blah, blah, blah? And he's like, oh my God. Yeah. And so like I do the same thing with music because I like the story. Whole story for me, it just makes me have more connection. And also because like I'm a firm believer that we're all just, people, regardless of our job titles. So like I like to learn about like the people element of bands and who they are. Like my husband and I when we were in Greece just a week and a half ago, we were driving somewhere and we were going back and forth about Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins. And we were like, what part of Genesis were they both in? Like, it's like this, hold on, I got to Google this. Like, it just becomes like a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just imagining if you're coming up in a household where you are really want to know all the background stuff, and then you get in this scene where you're like, who are these bands that it seems like you'd want to, I don't know, from my perspective, it kind of just visualized you just being like, I have to know everything about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I'm like super duper nosy. Not in like a really jerky way, but like in a positive way. I just want to know all the meat and potato behind things.
So how does that lead to Fata?
So I started Fata, like I was saying a little earlier, with Jason Black from Hot Water. Hot Water Music was doing their own stuff. I knew Hot Water Music from doing shows. Jason was like, we're booking this big tour. Maybe you can help me with it. It was already half done. I started doing the rest of it. And he passed me contacts, which back then was how, like I think we had maybe 4 independent booking agents at the time. Tim Bohr being one. And I don't remember if at the time Tim was already at a corporate company. But like it was like Margie at Do It and Stormy Shepherd. It wasn't many at all. There was a guy named Rick Bondi who did Blink-182, and Corey Christopher actually came under him, and she's Imagine Dragons agent, for example. But there weren't many of us. There was like a handful of people. There was like the Matt Pikes of the world and the Matt Galleys of the world doing the hardcore stuff. But that was, I feel like, a little bit later than what I'm talking about. Andrew Ellis came on the scene shortly thereafter, a few years after I did. But it was all the same contacts, and it was shared. Like, I don't even know how we shared them because we didn't have things like computer. We used computers, but we weren't really using them the way we use them now. It would be like spreadsheets, like a Word document with the name and things typed out, or like a lot of scrap paper. So Jason was like, well, this is the last people that we used, and they'll help you, get this together and blah, 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 blah. And we started doing the tour together. I completed the tour. And then probably a month later, Jason's like, hey, I want to introduce you to my friends in Elliott. They're looking for help too. So then I met the guys in Elliott. I started doing Elliott stuff. And then I met the guys in Jimmy Eat World. And then I got to work for Jimmy Eat World for a few years. And that was on the Clarity record. So that put me then on the map as an agent because they were the first kind of sceney band. Not the first, but like that was on a major label like Capitol. It kind of made me up my game. Kevin Lyman, noticed me at the time. Had Warped Tour, of course. He was also a manager for artists like Less Than Jake and the Ataris. At the time, Ataris were booming. This is now when I'm like between 19 and 20 at this window. I'm in college now. So I started when I was 18 in my brother's bedroom at home in Wilkes-Barre in high school. And then by the time I was 19, I'm in New Brunswick still doing it while going to Rutgers at college. Kevin called me up because I worked the radio station too. And he's like working radio for his artist at the time. It was the Taris. And we started talking and he's like, oh my God. He's like, don't tell anyone how old you are again. He's like, let me try and help you. And he did. He helped me and he still helps me. We've been friends all these years. I mean, our families are friends. Like his wife and my husband, we're all friends. And I'm so grateful for the time that he took and takes. And if I still want to bounce something or vent, I can call him. But between him and Mark Geiger, who was the head of William Morris agency until mid-pandemic, and now he's in the head of the position for a concert club network that saved a bunch of clubs essentially during the pandemic. And he's amazing. And he also was like the biggest of big. I mean, I think that at the time he was he still worked through forever for Pearl Jam and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And I mean, I think he was doing Lollapalooza when it was still a tour. And he was just like, okay, well, we're going to teach you how to structure real deals and what a writer is and the tech element of it. And so I then had mentors, even though I felt my face quite a bit. Don't get me wrong. I had really good mentorship from that point onward, that I felt the ability to ask serious questions like, how do you ask for money? Mm. How do you get people paid? So there's a lot of power in asking for something and then being silent afterwards. But yeah, so that's how Fata started. It was all scene bands though. It was like we at the time still were just a lot of boutiques open. I don't think the bigger companies were as interested in those bands until probably say around like the 2002s. Things kind of felt like they started changing where you had artists like Something Corporate being on a major, like going from Drive Through, going to a major, or Dashboard Confessional, these really rooted, I don't know if Something Corporate's a rooted scene band, but you know what I mean, sound. They started getting really mainstream attention. So the game changed again from being like a DIY scene to slowly merging out of the existence of a scene and more a culmination of...
It was more of a business, I'd say.
More of a business, and all the genres were accepted. Like when I was younger, I've seen the Grateful Dead quite a few times. Not a lot of my friends knew that. Like I feel like you just got to keep stay in your lane in your musical palette, right? Where I think that now, and as Warped Tour became... I think Warped Tour was always very eclectic, personally. Like I've seen, Jurassic 5 there, which I think at the time I was maybe 19 when he always had an eclectic lineup, but it was mainly surrounding the pop punk genre, right? Yeah. Ska. And I think that as time grew on and the scene sound got a little different, more things got mainstream, like a lot of like the eyeliner, screamo bands started getting mainstream. I think things became more of a salad bowl where everyone got to listen to whatever they wanted, which I think is great. But it also changed the game in terms of where we were and what became more of an industry thing, in my opinion.
Just to that point, right, there's a couple things I want to go back to, but like for where we are now, when that whole thing, so coming up as a hardcore kid, punk kid, you being in that scene and being underground, and then you start seeing all the eyeliner, the hairstyles and shit. From a scene perspective, what were your thoughts about that?
I think I've always been open to a lot of different changes. Like I don't know if I really had a thought about. There's some screamo that I'm like, oh, well, I guess if they like it. But you know what? That's how I was with the hardcore bands, like the Cookie Monster, Chugga Chuggas. I was like, oh, all right, friends, whatever floats your boat. But I mean, like, there are certain artists that got classified as screamo, like the Blood Brothers, which I didn't consider screamo at all, which I worked for, for a very long time, and I loved that sound. I don't think that I think change is fun. I think if you keep one thing the same, then it gets boring. And in history of music, you've seen all the different changes, and the screamo generation was not the first one to tease their hair and make it big and put eyeliner on. I mean, I'm a huge Cure fan, so
I feel like the Cure did it. The Cure did it well, but then the '80s bands did it until they got made fun of from Nirvana, and now they can come out and do it, and everyone's about it.
don't get me wrong. I could listen to a good Poison song
Oh
or
yeah.
Winger any day of the week, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, yeah, my whole thing on music has always been, especially because I have no musical talent whatsoever, my talent is cooking. Like, who am I to judge? Like, if there's one fan listening, then someone is making something for someone.
When you started the whole so you started Fata, what were some mistakes you made the first couple of years?
Thinking that the people you worked with were your friends. I think that coming from the scene, which is a tough scene to come from, especially for being a woman, a girl, it was there wasn't many, it's not easily, you're not easily accepted. You always need like the proper person introducing you to certain circles. A lot of times I found a lot of the girls didn't even talk to each other. If, like it felt very, very ostracizing at times. And therefore the word friendship I felt was very loose at times as well. Like everyone that talks to anyone in the scene are friends. And I just think that you can have a common respect for people and even an appreciation and love for that person at the time. But when you're working with them, especially musicians, because it's such a hard business, they might find that they deserve different than you're providing for them. And or someone might tell them that they will give them more if they worked with them, and then you're heartbroken. I feel like as much as my career has been filled with so many awesome experiences, I just kind of would have rather acknowledge people as people I respect and liked versus connecting. And then when those times came to an end, which happens a lot in our industry, I wouldn't have felt so personally offended by them.
I talked to Avange. I interviewed her a while back. She worked with you for a while, and so she was mentioning when some bands would get mad because they wouldn't get big slots or things like that. And she's like, well, if you're not drawing, there's really only so much I can do for you.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, I deal with that every day currently still. Like, why are we not on this tour? Or like, one of my artists about to announce a tour that someone else wanted and they're not going to get it because the other artist got it. And then 6 months ago, I ended up losing an artist because they thought that I had pushed one client for a tour rather than them, though their parameters monetarily didn't fit the parameters of the headliner. It's just like, it becomes very interesting how we're supposed to be, a magician with this cute little white rabbit. We're just yanking it out of hats. And we're like, here you go. Here's your rabbit. I mean, and Avange knows. I mean, Avange was at Fata for like a good 5-6 years, and we were very close, and we've lived together for a long time, and we were around bands all the time. And I think for me, like the more I remove myself out of that situation and see into it, I was like, it's just like any big group, right? Like it's better to keep everyone realistically in their lane. Like these are really great people. I'm having a great moment with them. And when that moment is done, if there's not a real friendship there, then you can wish them well and move on. That's something I wish I learned earlier in my career. And my best friend, who she's worked in finance our whole adult life, she's like, every time I tell her like a frustrating scenario at work, she's like, okay, so this sounds like every other story you tell me for the past 28 years. And she's like, Eva, it's just business. And I'm like, yeah, but this is so messed up. And she's like, still just business. Could be messed up, but can you just categorize it there so you feel better? And then I'll feel better about it.
Do you want to be friends with like the bands or the people you work with, or have you gotten to the point where you can just be business with them and that's fine?
Well, the people who work at Fata, I love them like family. So the people here that work within this collective are amazing people that I do consider friends and they know my kids and they know my husband. They come to barbecues and whatever. And if they at any point had, wanted to go and further their career somewhere else, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm the one that chose to be in Philadelphia and chose to keep Fata a small company when I had other options. So I'm not going to hold anyone hostage here if they wanted to do that. Now, the bands I work with, I have like a faulty of like loving hard. So like I will like absorb people and I'll be like, and if I meet someone who has like an infectious personality, like I will get drawn to that and want to be friends with them in my mind. But I care about the people I work with. I just try not to call them my friend. I don't know if that makes sense. Like I can care about the people I work with and I can care about their career. And I don't, my stepfather said this to me a long time, who's not here with us anymore. And he said, don't change who you are because of other people's actions. Always stay who you are. In other words, don't get jaded and cold because of whatever someone else did, right? So I'm not going to change who I am within how I treat my, Fata is a small boutique. I kept this way so we can have an intimate connection with our artists and pay attention to things that we're doing. I have like 5 friends in life, and that's what I'm going to stick with that.
I work for myself. It's totally different. I do like, in the marketing shit, but I always appreciate when businesses stay to a size where they go, we're just going to be this big so we can stay here. We know what we want to make and it's manageable, instead of like all these new businesses, like you got to scale and get all this and shit. I'm like, you're going to lose it at some point. You got to find a cap.
Yeah, I think that there's some management companies or some agencies that did really well by that in my business. But in my business, like artists move around a lot. So like I think Fata used to be staffed bigger and we used to have more and there was a lot more in the pot. Not saying that we don't do big things still, just a more manageable stake. And I think that things fluctuate. So like I'm fine. I think that happens in the big companies and the small companies.
What was like your style of booking when you first started off? Were you a little bit timid, or were you just kind of like how Kevin said to you, like, don't say your age? Did it kind of make you have to build this persona when you started booking?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there was definitely the first few years where I didn't even let anyone know like what I looked like, no less how old I was. Or, I was trying to like really come off professional and confident and certain, even though like I was a completely opposite early on in my career. I was like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. And am I asking for this the right way? But I definitely had a lot of inspiration by Margie and Stormy as the women in our industry. And they were, at the time, like Stormy was working for like Offspring and Rancid and like all of the biggest punk bands down to the ones that were mainstream at that time. And she was doing it with 2 other people. And I was like, okay. So like my whole thing was I definitely had an unstoppable mentality. Like even when I had job offers, the reason why I didn't take them pre 2009 was because I was like, I'm determined to do this myself. Like I'm determined to be a strong, confident woman owner. And I always try to build people up around me. And that's even something that early on in Fata, I tried to, and friend groups and, artists and, acquaintance friend, work friend artists or whatever. I'm always like the cheerleader, like, you can do this. You're doing great. But I think that's also something I do because I'm like, I have to constantly early on in my career, like I had to remind myself, like, you're doing good. You're okay. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Like Corey from Minus the Bear has these badges, like iron on patches. That's just his hashtag, keep going. And I remember when you first started making those, I'm like, I'm buying 7 of these because like, that's like my mantra, like at all times, like, okay, that sucked today. You get today. Tomorrow you got to keep going. Like you just, there's no room for not keeping on with the path. So that was how I was early on. I had the keep going mentality. Anytime my shutters went open, I tried to like close them again. So I would just look at my own path and not look at what other people were doing and, stay focused and things like that.
How'd you run the day to day in the beginning?
I just didn't sleep.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I feel like, and either did Yvonne. I mean, we worked all the time. I mean, I still have a very bad habit of not working. I mean, like we just spent, I mean, granted, we live in Greece in the summers because my family is Greek and we have a house there. Regardless, I'm not like, I work every night till 2 a.m. there during the weekdays to make it to LA hours. Like, I don't know how to, but like that was something that was imprinted was work, 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 work. It was like work, 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 go to a show, come back from the show or go out with the bands that you're out, you know, you're either working for or you're like work friends with or whatever, but then come back and make sure you're checking your email again. It's like never stopped. And back then we were like sending each contract, printing everything, putting them in binders. It just was so much work. It was always work.
Where'd you keep everything organized? Because just this is in your dorm, or you said your brother's room?
That was only the first year. It was my brother's room. The second, then when I was in New Brunswick, I moved into an apartment with my at the time boyfriend, and we looked for one that had like a spare something. So it was like him. We also lived with Brian Benoit from Dillinger Escape Plan, and there was this like kind of like what probably would be the equivalent of a nicer walk-in pantry. I built Fata in there.
Wow.
Then Fata moved to a pantry, and then
Amazing.
and then I lived in New York for a little bit, and then it was like the big exodus from like the Lower East Side to Williamsburg, like when everyone was moving to Williamsburg, and I had decided that I didn't feel comfortable living in Williamsburg and having to go to night shows in the city. And I was trying to figure out like where I was going to move to at the time. And it was like between Chicago or Philadelphia. And Brian Dilworth, who died during the pandemic, he was head of AG here, before that Live Nation Philadelphia. But before that, he was an independent and he also toured with, Rocket from the Crypt. So he was like, come to Philly. It's a great city. And he was right. I came to Philly. I love Philadelphia. I think Philly is a very manageable and amazing, fantastic city. And so there I shared an office with him and John Hampton, who was the head of Live Nation here for a while. Yeah, then it was, therefore after it was in proper offices until the pandemic.
Real quick, if you're looking for an explainer video or someone to do motion graphics for your company, check out my company, drive80.com, and you can email me at mike@drive80.com for more info. That's all I got to say. So now back to the interview. When did you look at Fata and you're like, holy shit, this is exactly where I wanted it to be, or this is surpassed where I wanted it to go?
Never. I think in my head, I'm always like striving. I'm a Gemini. It's like the worst curse. So like a part of me is like, this is great. And the other part of me is like, it's not there yet. Fata has been a very interesting roller coaster, and I have been in all of the seats. I'm very grateful for having this career and it being as sustainable as it's been because, I'm doing great in it. But I've always wanted to be one level higher without having to compromise the lifestyle I have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I still would want to keep like things the way I have it, but I would like all of it to be one level higher. I've always been happy with Fata though. Like I've never been unhappy with it. Does that make sense? I've always been happy with what we're doing and proud of our achievements.
Do you find it was more stressful in the beginning, or today it's still as stressful?
I think today is probably more stressful. The past 10 years, the industry has changed yet again. But then, of course, firmly rooted change post-pandemic. And the artists have changed, but also the work that's put in is not the same as the work that was done previous to the pandemic, like even previous, I feel like, to 10 years ago. I was speaking to a friend that's in a band the other day, and he and I have been friends since 2001, 2002, and they're on tour right now. And we were talking about like, he's like, like, what are you excited about? I'm like, well, it's kind of hard to like nail it down completely because I hear so many complaining about things that we're not like even at that level yet to be complaining about. So it's really challenging at time to try to micromanage why, kind of like what Yvonne was saying, why you're not getting these things. Yet the scaffolding, which I think is so important for artists, has never been placed. So there's no scaffolding, there's no mortar being stuck on the scaffolding. We only have things like streaming analytics to talk about. And there's two sides of the industry, right? And it's just like you can go back to like radio days. You can have radio triggering and getting good traction, but if you don't have your live business going at the same time in tandem and everything else working with it, so marketing and PR, even though I don't think PR moves the needle the way it used to, and so on and so forth, then you're only getting that radio play. So here we get these big playlists and we get like a lot of songs going viral and this and the other thing, if you're lucky, right? But no one's worked on their live side, and then they don't realize what they have to put into it. And so you tell them, or you tell their manager, who is not a touring manager, like not a manager who is seasoned with touring or has had the right mentorship to explain and manage their artist expectations and work that needs to be put in. And I find myself often explaining like, well, there's 2 people on our team versus the 5 or 6 that should be on the team. Again, we're not magicians. Like, it's all hands on deck then, like it has to be a work ethic that is a resemblance to previous successful touring decades. And I look at artists like, 21 Pilots, who supported very little and are top of the game, or, Melanie Martinez, who supported, I almost think nothing at all. And she's like one of the top artists, or like percent huge artists. A lot of them didn't support. They worked their tails off for a long time, but they just see the end result. So I find that is harder now, where in the past, if an artist was like, okay, well, we want festivals, which I don't think break bands festivals. I think they just are nice on resumes. And we want to support larger acts. It didn't mean they just sat home and didn't do anything.
Have you ever thought about, I don't know why this popped in my head, probably just because I work for myself. Have you ever thought about like writing something, not like a book, but some kind of, I don't know, like like a Jerry Maguire like manifesto, where you're like, this is, if you're gonna be in a band, do this shit and it's gonna work for you better than you expecting things to happen for doing nothing.
I mean, if I was a good writer, then maybe. This is not the first time I've been suggested an idea of writing. Like a woman approached me at the Elliott Falls Cathedral show, and she's like, I would love to write a book for you, like about you, like based on you, from you. And I'm like, that's weird, but okay. I mean, that sounds fun. She's like, the stories, because there's so many stories. Like, there's so many stories when you come from the independent. I mean, you were in a touring band. You remember the stories are uncountable. Like, how many people slept on my floor? Can't even count it. Like how many bands have slept on my floor in New Brunswick, in Wilkes-Barre, in Philadelphia. Like, it's the stories there's so many like stories, but like the tutorial, like when you talk, I mean, sometimes I think I'm going crazy and I'll call up one of the bigger agents that are like now, the heads of these companies, because we've known each other for so long. And I'm like, am I going crazy? I'm like, how do you do things? And they'll be like, no, we do it just like that. I'm like, I must be losing my mind. Or they're losing their mind, because this is unrealistic. But because I'm an independent, the fruit of my labor is what is my success, right? I'm always trying to navigate accommodating these unrealistic expectations, which then I think is actually building bad habits. But anyways.
Are bands actually, I mean, obviously they are, but I don't know what the behind the scenes are. I don't know what a band should ask when they show up at a club and play or wherever. But like, how the fuck are they making money?
Well, that's a good question, because it's really, really expensive right now. So I don't know how I don't know how bands and artists make money when they're not touring. And that's like, that goes back to my nosy part, where I'm like, a lot of times I don't even know how managers make money, because with mine, it's like there's like something tangible. You could see it, like, okay, this 10% of this money comes to me, right? A lot of times when it comes to touring, and again, like, this goes back to what I was talking about with the previous generation versus the current. Like, I've had this conversation saying, sleep on floors. You'd be surprised how good that actually does for you, even for your attendance. You make friends. They bring their friends next time. You go to a house party. Jeff from Thursday and I lived a block from each other in New Brunswick. He used to throw before Thursday was a band. I mean, Thursday became a band while I was still in New Brunswick. But before they became a band, he did all of the basement shows. And they were so much fun. I'm like, just go to a house party, go meet. Be like, I remember like the Saves the Day guys, that video for Through Being Cool. It was an orchestrated house party, but it was essentially a house party. Like, I'm just like, go and meet people, because when you meet people, they're going to like you and they're going to come see your music. It's like, when you open for someone bigger, and I'm a firm believer of this, and I've seen it countless times in my career. You have these artists that want to be on these huge tours, and they open up for these huge artists, and there's like 5 to 20,000 people there, and they retain none of those fans. And the reason is because when people want to go see the Foo Fighters, they don't want to see the opening band. It's kind of like when At the Drive-In got booed off of the stage with Rage Against the Machine back, I guess 20 years ago now, or whatever it was. It's because it doesn't matter how big At the Drive-In was at the time. Rage's fans did not want to see that band. They wanted to see Rage. I mean, who would not want to see Rage? I don't know. But my point is, the opening band does not gain. So I'm a bigger advocate of go make friends. Go like, in the past, in the early stages of the music scaffolding of Fata, the time I started, the time Yvonne was there, those eras, like we picked up small bands and worked them because there was a DIY scene and there were independent people booking shows. And I'm not saying independent companies, I'm saying independent people. They're different. Like, being not funded by Live Nation does make you technically an independent. I'm not taking that away from people, but they weren't people putting on shows with the intention of 20 people being there, or them trying to get like a hand flyer and put locals on to make sure 150 people are there, whatever it is. There was the ability to pick up small bands, but the big companies never picked up bands until things were going on. Like, in fact, when one of the years I taught at Drexel University, which was on and off for about 11 years, I taught the booking classes and some of the management classes. There's a saying, like, you have a manager when there's something to manage. You have an agent when there's something to agent. Like, it's just, we're supposed to be opening doors to different experiences and different, tastemakers and different avenues for growth. But like, when there's nothing going on, like, we are literally building the entire narrative. And that is an extreme amount of work on so many levels, because we have to convince people to even like take a chance on you. And then artists now don't really want to self-promote themselves, where even before MySpace, because I come from a generation that didn't have MySpace first. We had Friendster, but Friendster didn't have advertised artists. You had people always like reaching out to friends and reaching out to sleep on people's floor and saying, hey, bring 5 of your friends to the show. And then you had someone flyering. It wasn't digital ads. And there's something really, solid about getting a piece of paper in your hand, which is why, like, when I get a, vote for Harris flyer in my mailbox, I'm more likely to look at it than 17 texts that I get every other day.
So kind of going back in the beginning, how did you, because you're talking about like getting bands and working with local bands, how did you get bands?
It's always really been early on, it was like referrals. They all knew each other. All the bands knew each other. So like Hot Water knew the Get Up Kids, knew Elliott, knew Jimmy Eat World, knew, the Chrissy Front Drive, and so on and so forth. They all knew each other. Like, Hot Water Music knew AFI, knew, like, then later on we took Thrice on their first tour. And then the record label people were all independent, either band people. It was all very punk rock. Like, you talk to, at the time, Hot Water was on Doghouse. So Dirk, which is, a very established manager, doing great in his career, was running this independent label, busting his balls to get these independent artists out there. And so we would talk to the people at the label. So then the label would then say, hey, listen, I have this artist too, which is really cool. Or the label would say it to the artist, like, oh, well, Eva is working for Hot Water, so maybe you should reach out to her. Like, Elliott was on Revelation, and Jimmy World was on Capitol. So then I got to then be exposed to major label people who were developing their next bigger push. So it was all referral back then. And then, of course, like, because of infrastructure like Warped Tour existing, when we go to Warped Tour, someone would be like, oh, you should check out this band. Or like, I remember my roommate, which was in Dillinger Escape Plan and the Dillinger guys, and they were friends with a man named Carl, who sadly is not with us anymore, but his brother was in a band that turned into being Vox, if you remember them.
Yeah, I remember. The reason I know about them is there's a video of them on a Warped Tour compilation from like 2002 or 2004 or something.
I probably put them on that walk trip. But I remember like Carl always being like, Eva, you gotta check out this band. Eva, and they were like super mathy, like all of those pseudo bands at the time, like Dillinger and stuff. Not as metal as Dillinger, but not like a melodic band either, or an indie rock band or whatever. I was walking by a band playing Warped Tour in Colorado, which is where the band was from. And they were on a local stage, and I just stopped. And I'm like, who is this band? And I was with Jason Black and Hot Water Music, and they were just like tearing it up. I found out that ended up being Carl's brother's band, and I introduced myself not knowing that at the time. But so sometimes just walking by a stage on Warped Tour and having that infrastructure really helped you learn new bands as well. Or like being in a catering room at Warped Tour, and Kevin being like, oh, you should meet this band or this manager or whatever. It was kind of just all interconnected. It's a pretty small business industry. The music industry is not that big.
Did you have any bands in the beginning that you were like, you went after, saying like, oh, I need to book for these guys?
Someone that didn't have you mean like someone that didn't have an agent?
Well, someone that you, like a band that you loved and you're like, I need to get them on my roster. Where some bands you were introduced randomly, like, oh, hi. And then you're like, oh, we should work together. But then there's ones out there where it's kind of like, I was like your North Star, but you're like, I have to fucking get this band.
I was like that with Pretty Girls Make Graves. Derek from Murder City Devils was starting Pretty Girls Make Graves, and they were in town, Murder City Devil. I knew those guys from Hot Water, and he came to the Philadelphia house with Nick from Pretty Girls Make Graves, and they actually stayed at my house. And we were just all hanging out with like a bunch of friends, and he's like, hey, you want to listen to another band I'm doing? Because Derek always did multiple bands. Weirdly enough, they all had multiple agents, not the same agent. And I heard it and I was like, oh my God, I have to work for this. It was like Seattle's finest. Andrea's such a star. All the musicians in Pretty Girls Make Graves are so talented. I fell in love with it immediately. And he's like, oh, well, I think that, we're going to be working with, at the time, this man named Chad, who was the head of AEG Northwest, but he used to be a booking agent back in the day in independent realm like all of us. And I kept in touch with him, but of course it happened that like Chad's like, I'm gonna get the business and just go straight into continuing my straight and narrow on booking the clubs. I don't remember what he was doing at the time. And then I got like right in. I was like, Derek's like, yeah, well, why don't we just see how it goes? And I was like head over heels. Like I loved working for the Pretty Girls Make Graves people. And I also loved working for the Elliott people. Though I was introduced to them, I wasn't like False Cathedrals, which was the album everyone is like cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs over. It wasn't even out when I started working. It didn't even exist yet when I started working for them. So I loved their music and I loved them live, but I didn't hear like what False Cathedrals and Starka like drooly. Like I need to work for this right now. I just needed to work for them because they were a sick band.
When Napster comes out and everything kind of becomes downloadable, does that have any negative effect on you?
I mean, yeah. I don't think it did a negative so much on the live side because people would come and see things live that they loved and got excited about anyways. But I definitely think that it caused a lot of chaos in terms of artists getting paid properly. So therefore, it put a little pressure on our side of things to change the paying structure on the touring side. And then that led into, I don't really remember what years Napster was. I feel like that was like 2000. But the next 9 years, you had like that kind of unraveling, getting worse and things leaking and different platforms coming and going. And then you hit the recession in 2009. So I feel like it was a culmination of a lot of things changing for artist sides and label sides, which, indirectly affected us because we had to make sure that people were able to afford to tour, which I think is still a problem, affordability.
I can't imagine how bands tour now with just the gas prices alone.
Well, and they're also, a lot of them aren't signed to record labels like they were in the past. They're all signed to distribution companies, and distribution company doesn't give tour support.
What are your thoughts on clubs taking percentage of the merchandise?
Well, I remember a time period when that didn't happen. I don't remember when it happened, but it felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. I remember being in the office space with Hampton and Dilworth. So when I was like, oh, what is this on an offer sheet? I'm sure I'm going to piss off a lot of people when I say this. I don't agree with it.
I'm not even in the business, and I fucking hate. I think it's stupid, but go on.
Yeah, I think unless the venue is being proactive on creating and also marketing and selling the merchandise, then they shouldn't have to pay a cut. And if their venue person is selling for them, let's say like Live Nation has a seller from Live Nation, they are getting paid an amount to sell the merch in addition to the merch cut. So I just don't know if I understand it too much. Like I know the revenue gross on the venue side is obviously hard because these shows are not like maybe a slam dunk all the time. But I guess like it feels like it could be better suited at a certain capacity up. Like it's kind of like if you're paying the record label a 360 deal now, which is taking on merch and taking on in some situations touring and gaining revenue there, and then the promoters are taking revenue from your merch, and the gas is so high, expenses are so high, rentals are so high, the apparel is high to purchase. Where are they gaining the money to be able to get from point A to point B and have a sustainability? And I oftenly say now when I pick up an artist, like, can you afford to tour? Because you don't need me if you can't. Like that's what I do. Like I put you on tour.
Do you ever have bands who are wary about splitting the merch with the club where you say, all right, well, here's a list of clubs you can stay away from when you're on the road?
Not anymore.
Yeah, we played a show with Midtown in 2022 in Starland, and it was 2,500 people. In our band, like we maybe made like 1,000 merch. The place took 20% of the merch, and I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me, dude.
Yeah, which is common.
I was like, cool, can we get a percentage of the bar because no one would fucking be here if the bands weren't
Yeah.
here? Fucks.
Which a lot of times won't happen because the promoters are not in house. Like there's times where I'm like, okay, well, let's negotiate and have like a special bar drink, like Hidden in Plain View, for example, the singer brews beer. So like I'm like, oh, well, maybe we can get like the local microbreweries to come and do like a special 2 hour drink around their anniversary shows that are coming up. And then people are like, oh yeah, no, that's not our we're not in, that's in house. And I'm like, yeah, but the bar's gonna like make bank.
Yeah, that's my fucking thought on it. What are some tricks you learned in the beginning that you still use today?
Less is more. So when I need to have an uncomfortable conversation and or I need to ask for something that I might not be comfortable asking for because it's like a big ask, a big monetary, but like, because I'm developing artists and they might be going from point A to point, Z at the time or whatever. If I'm being confrontational and or I have to ask for something that's, out of like the comfort zone of the conversation, I will say what I need to say or ask what I need to ask, but then I will probably stop talking afterwards to let the other person just figure out what they need to do next. I just say less. I've done that a long time coming where someone taught that to me early on when I was asking how to ask for, it was like my first $10,000 request. And they were just like, just say we're looking for 10,000 for this show or whatever. And then don't say anything else. I like that is brilliant. And it's something I've used almost in every single thing in my life. Like if someone is being shitty, like I'll just say something like, yeah, I won't address that in this format. We can figure out a different way to talk and then just stop talking. I just let people just hear it, whatever I need to say. And like, I'm not going to debate with people or even negotiate more than the window or the scope I said. So if I'm asking for something, they can then think about it. Or I could say like, if I'm trying to pick up a new artist, I say little about like my achievements because I feel like that's easy to find. I talk about what we do, and then I just end the conversation a lot of times like, well, no, you guys can just talk things over and come back to me with whatever questions you might have, or if you feel like this is a good fit. And then I say nothing else. Like, so it's just with everything I apply it to I try to be less than more. So I'm not over speaking or trying to sound like I'm walking in circles or giving loopholes to say no or whatever.
Did you go on the road with any bands at any point?
Yes, I have been on the road with many bands. I have been on the road in buses, vans, and RVs. and I think all of them have been on mistake where I'm like, I'll go on 2 shows. And then somehow I'm like, how am I still here? I think that all the experiences have been super duper fun. I don't think there was ever like a moment where I'm like, oh my God, this was a huge mistake. I don't like being on the road. But I think that all the times that I had been on the road, like they were with great people. Like I've had great experience with the Pretty Girls people and the Hot Water people. And I've been on, I was on Kevin Lyman Warped bus with, at the time it was like all the production people were on the same bus with Kevin and myself for like 3 weeks. And, it was fun to be in those environments because you got to see different things, different people, things open up and shut down and different venues that you work with. So I liked it. I have never had to be on the road where I was rough dogging it though. So where I'm like sleeping on someone's floor. Don't get me wrong, I've done that in other situations, but not that time.
Is being on a tour bus as cool as it sounds?
I don't like bunks, so I always slept in the back lounge because I feel like I was in a coffin. I think that it's cool enough, I guess, not as cool as being in a house or a hotel.
Yeah, but like going from point A to point B is it's a little bit more comfortable when you're sitting on the couch instead of.
For sure. I mean, it also helps the time go by, right? Like when I did Warped Tour, it was the West Coast and I ended in Chicago. So like it was like all of the West Coast and then we went through the Midwest and you didn't even realize, like, I mean, I have never done the Midwest in a van, but I could only imagine that drive between like the Colorados to whether it's even Omaha, which is shorter than the Lawrence or the Kansas Cities, just would be just the most boring like drive ever. So, and I hate being in a car too. So I'm not like the best person to give that, opinion on. My husband was in a touring band. He often is like, we drove to Vegas once from Jersey just because. And I'm like, well, that just sounds horrible in every way possible. But yeah, no, thank you. But yeah, I've done it. I like, the experience I've had and the bus is cool enough.
Have you thought about shutting down the agency at any point?
Oh my God, like 5 million times in my life. Yes, I think that, like I said, I'm really, really, really grateful for my career. So ultimately, no. But when I get very frustrated at things that I need to figure out for other people, or if I work really, really hard on something and then I lose it, which is not uncommon in our business, to lose a client to someone else just because. Moments like that, I feel like, what am I doing here? But like I said, my best friend from 6 years old has been like, oh, you're having that moment again. Great. Don't worry, this too shall pass because apparently I repeat myself to her. She's like, oh, good thing I know this won't pass. So they're just moments, I like to call them little shadows. They just peek in and they peek out.
Which band that you managed do you hate the most? No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
Do you really want to know?
It's like a Hot Ones question right there. You got to eat the wing now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's funny. I think that there are people that have shockingly turned in a certain way through time and have probably always been like that, but maybe my blind eye gave them a little bit outs, became more clear to me because I'm more clear in general as a person now that I'm like, I've stopped working with where I'm like, I can't have those kind of like people around me. And as long as I own Fata and I'm making my own choices of what I want to work with, I'm going to remove anyone that makes me feel shitty. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I don't like to use the word toxic. It's just too trendy of a word for me. But just anyone that makes me feel like piques my stress level because of whether they're passive aggressive or their personalities are just vindictive or they're just selfish. I try to not keep them around and or pick anyone up like that.
Can you kind of catch from the beginning? Like, do you have a better bullshit radar than from like,
I do. I could catch things in the beginning. I sometimes will make excuses and still work with it, and I'll be right. And I'm like, oh, why did I do that? I am much better about it. I think this is like in general, like what they talk about being like, I mean, I'm 47, so being later in your life, you don't have, the space you once had for like, people that make you unhappy or bullshit or whatever. I think that kind of ultimately bleeds into my work as well. And also, I think going back to people that, in the past, maybe it was just something that was so small that we stopped talking. Like I've been very mindful about going back and like reopening those relationships anyway, just to move past any kind of like shitty feelings that might have existed when it shouldn't have happened, just like younger things. I'm really lucky. I don't have that many ended relationships that have left such lingering feelings out of friendships and or business, but the ones that I have in the past maybe like 5 years I've just removed because I thought the personalities had changed or affected me negatively. I'm fine not talking to those people again.
all right, well, I'm gonna start wrapping this up before I ask the last two questions. People sometimes get stumped by this one, but I just ask it anyway. There's a story you've always wanted to tell in an interview that you've never told that you'd like to tell now.
mm, that is a tough one. I mean, there's a lot of things that have been shared in interviews. I mean, I think that one of the stories that stayed with me, I don't know if this is like worth mentioning, but it might help someone somewhere. Earlier in my career, a male agent once said to me, "What do you think you can accomplish? You're just a girl." And I remember that gave me so much ammo to root myself in a firm way that really gave me like the ability to do what I did and continue doing what I do. Because even though we're better at that stuff than we once were, especially when I started in the business, I think that I volunteer to speak at panels and to young girls. And the reason why I taught for so long was to really be able to be a present female for anyone that needs that in our business. So it's not like a story so much. It's more of a comment that stayed with me that I don't think I've ever mentioned this to anyone in an interview, but it really stayed with me in a positive way because it made me drive myself in a way that I might have been ignorant to think that, there were people that believed I can just skate through without having that undertone.
Well, what does that look like, right? So let's say if it was a physical competition and a guy says that to a girl, the path is, okay, I train harder, I get up earlier, I do all this stuff. So those are the actual tasks I do to get there, and that helps along the way. What actually did that do for you task-wise, or because you could say that was a driving force, but what are the things you actually did because of that better?
Um, well, I could tell you that I, in most public places, kept myself in probably the most professional possible demeanor that I could be in. I kind of felt like I would never give anyone an excuse to ever turn around and be like, "Oh, do you see?" I mean, granted, I was born in a time period where if a girl wore a skirt too short, that's their fault for doing certain things. So I wish a part of me never catered towards that thought of being like, "Oh, don't do this because someone will view you in an unprofessional light," or "do this and then someone won't hire you." Like I really wish that I as a very like active feminist did whatever I wanted at all times. But what I did by his comment was I buttoned myself up at a very young age and was like, "Okay, well, I'll hang out with these people, but I'm going to be the professional, like hang in the room," or like, I just would try to keep myself in a very professional demeanor. I mean, it doesn't mean with my peers that I like have a few shots of tequila here and there, but ultimately I tried my best to like always be super pro and to be very strong with comments and to not let any other avenue of non-professional demeanor slide in there.
Did you keep tabs on that guy and where he ended up?
Yeah. There's a a lot of like comments like that kind of linger. That was the most blunt one I feel like I've ever endured, where I was like, oh, it is different. Like you said, you can measure it differently when it comes to like a comment on the athletic side, or, I mean, I have a son and a daughter, and I was talking to them about the Olympics, and we were talking about when we were watching it this summer in Greece, and we were just talking about like how everyone was playing this, like doing the same thing. Like the swimmers were doing the same amount of laps, on the 500, or like the breaststrokes of the same amount of laps, or like the butterfly is not any different for the female or the male, like just conversations like that. Yeah, it's always an interesting thing to like live, especially because I think that, and I'll bring Avanj into this, like the generation that she and I were out like at festivals and working, and there wasn't that many girls. So it's like you really worked hard to try and like, maintain like this professional demeanor, so that way you were respected. Now I think everyone should just do whatever they want, and if they don't respect you, just they can fuck off, and you could just slay it anyways.
Well, yeah, it's that point. I mean, remember when we were around, your guys' names came up, like you guys, Stormy, and we were always like, oh man, if we got with them, we'd be really getting somewhere.
I love that. So sweet. Love
Yeah,
that.
that is definitely true.
That's I mean, it's funny, like I got a text message yesterday from a promoter in Oklahoma. He's a really amazing promoter, and he was telling me how during a meeting with all the promoters in this group that was formed in the pandemic. I mean, I don't want to say it was only Mark Geiger, but Mark Geiger from CA, or William Morris started it, and with some other people. And it was a collective to save venues. And so a lot of people are in this collective of independent venues, right? And apparently my name came up on the call, as a badass agent and a legend. And I'm like, that's what I want to be remembered as. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, and and I got two more emails to follow from two people that I've never met before. That was like, oh, your name came up on our call, on our big conference call today. And, Mark Geiger said, what a badass you are, and we need to reach out. And I'm like, this is what makes 28 years all worth it. Thank you. It's just the little things. Like we started it one way, and if we were to ever end it, I'd want it to be on a high note. It's like never something that like everything is going so horribly. Like I want to always be proud of the things that we did. And I'm proud of everyone that's ever been here. Like I'm proud of Yvonne when she was here, and I'm proud of what she became afterwards. And I'm proud of, Marshall Betts, who used to be here, and now he started his own company during the pandemic. And, before that he was a Paradigm. And I'm proud of Chris and Kalani from my office. Like I'm proud of everyone that's ever been here and worked within this collective of group of amazing people. The artists, like I feel like it must be really like you probably can confirm this more than me. And my husband and I will debate sometimes, like him, someone that spent a long time being on the road, and me spending a long time developing behind a desk, people on the road. Like I don't know what it's like to know that there's a timeline that you're trying to do and get to by the time you're X, Y, and Z. So you're making a living off something you love. Like I just know the mathematical part of this. Like if I have you touring and I have you do this and I have you do that and everything equals out and half that is done properly and the other half is luck, then we're getting places, right? But the people who are out on the road are leaving everything of their comfort zone, and they have their own insecurities. And so, even the people who had not stayed with Fata because they thought they were doing the right thing at the time, I appreciate the experience I had with them too. I think that every artist that I had a really strong connection with and worked for, there was a really good journey that came with them, whether the outcome stayed with me or not, or whether it was good or bad at the end.
Well, so I'm gonna wrap it up on that note. Before I ask the last question, what would you like to plug? It could be about you, it could be about a friend or a cause, it can be about both.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I don't know what to plug. Well, because there's so much to plug. Like I'm like Chris and Kalani from my office are totally plug worthy because they're so badass. There's two. I mean, I am and have been developing some Greek artists in the United States, which I'm super excited of. So I'm plugging the Greek vibe right now that I'm doing. I think it's so super fun. No, I don't really know what to plug in besides like there's so many really cool things happening right now in music and the people working at it. And I think that anything that everyone could be doing to be a part of that, they should be. And those of you who are thinking about working in the music industry or taking a class or you majored in it, like pick up a friend's band and start working for them now, not later. So I might not have a plug on something, but maybe a piece of advice, like do it early, do it by yourself, do it while you're in college, don't drop out of college. And just like grind it out. Like don't be scared of your own grind. No one defines your own success but you.
Did your college help you with your career?
Oh my God, of course. I have a psych degree.
Oh, there we go. That makes sense.
It helps a lot.
All right, so if you're going to deal with bands, get a psych degree. Don't worry about business.
I think everyone should get a psych degree. I'm like, teachers get a psych degree, agents get a psych degree, humans that want to exist in life get a psych degree. It really helps you like navigate. Like I sometimes look at people, I'm like, you should unpack that.
Oh, I know. I do that all the time. I'm like, you ever thought about therapy? They're like, nah, I don't need it. I'm like, oh no,
You're
that's
so
really bad.
wrong though.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're so behind, man.
it's okay. You can go have therapy. No one's gonna judge.
All right, so wrap it up. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
Oh, that God, scene ethics. Well, you're probably, and a lot of people are probably going to disagree with me, but I didn't think the scene was a very supportive scene.
Mm.
I didn't. I actually I thought the scene I grew up in tended to lean unsupportive, judgy, and misogynistic. So I think that I think a space where women know that they can be involved in male things is an ethics that I learned from the scene and living in with your power in that and making sure that you keep going through and all the way through, like see it all the way through is something that I learned with the scene because I didn't have that support early on. Later on I did, but not early on. So I think that I did learn that as an ethic from the scene because it was taught by some, really amazing, female, musicians like Team Dresch or, like a Riot, like any of the Riot Girl, Bikini Kill, stuff like that, working out there and being strong, outspoken feminists. But that's just, I think that was a scaffolding of a lot of ethics came from that scene that I imprinted and stayed with me through time.